this, the alliance. This is the second anniversary of the alliance in reaction to the SEC and Texas and Oklahoma. The alliance with the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12 announced an historic alliance that will bring 41 world-class institutions together on a collaborative approach surrounding the future evolution of college athletics.
See, that's not completely a lie. They collaborated with those conferences and figured out how to use them to change the future of college athletics, which the Big Ten did. And now those two conferences, one of them is non-existent, and then one of them is in the midst of infighting that may result in them adding 3 schools that won't improve their football product at all, yet ESPN, I guess, maybe is contractually obligated to pay for it if they do that. If they've already, I don't know.
Well, that's one of the reasons I asked her to come on.
I'm so confused about all of this because ESPN and Fox have all this television money, and they obviously were encouraging conferences to expand, but you're paying all this money is going to go to these schools that are going out, and in the wake of the alliance failing in the last 2 years, or it didn't even take 2 months to fail, and we knew everything was going on. But yeah, it is so strange what's going on in the ACC right now that, okay, we're not interested in paying Cal and Stanford, any more than $30 million a year to play each other in the Pac-12. And we don't want to see Arizona, all that stuff. We don't want the Pac-12 anymore. There's no money for it. There's no television deal and all that. But you're going to pay them to go play somebody else that they've never played before?
It's almost like there's more value, Craig, for Cal Stanford on an Eastern Coast conference than there is when they were a part of what was a 100-plus-year-old conference in the Pac-12.
Well, first of all, in the alliance, I mean, it was historic. It was historically laughable. It was historically forgettable and yet unforgettable because of how silly it turned out to be, especially given all the chest puffing and posturing that there was at the time. If y'all remember when that announcement was made, a lot of Pac fans, not all of them, but some of the more arrogant ones that wonder, where's this Big 12 vitriol coming from? It's coming back from that. It's coming back from, yes, passovers of previous possible editions when you snubbed Texas Tech or Oklahoma State. It comes from some of that as well. But I think just in general, some of that comes from that whole alliance situation. And it is amazing how just that did not matter at all in the long run. But it was a big deal that day and for like a little while afterwards. But really, it became nothing. And now, as you point out, it's really nothing because one branch doesn't even hardly exist now at this point. They exist in name only. All 4 of the schools that are even keeping it together are all looking for outs and places to land. And, one of them, the one that, basically got into it and then was the one that kind of tore it apart as well, is the one that's sitting fat and happy and got what they wanted with Kevin Warren at the time, right? And then, the other one's in the midst of whatever's going on that Paul's trying to figure out, and I think everybody else is trying to figure out. I know there's a lot of wishy-washy kind of reporting out there on this. I've seen a couple in particular where it just changes like the wind blows to fit whatever the feeling is like online at that moment, and it's like, oh, it's quiet. Okay, let's rustle something up. It's too loud. Oh, let's calm it down because nothing's actually happening. There's just been a lot of and that's not directed in any certain direction. It's just in general, this has been a very wishy-washy sort of story that you can't really make a lot of sense of because, like you said, it doesn't make any sense. It just really doesn't. I mean, it makes sense like we talked about yesterday from the standpoint of people need places to go. Okay, so from that standpoint, it makes sense that Cal and Stanford would have interest in the ACC. It would make sense. It makes sense that the ACC is looking for any ways to get extra money. But as far as how this holds everything together and it all puts the pieces back in places where they need to be so that we can all move on, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The only thing I can think of is that I get it from Cal and Stanford's point of view.
Heck yeah.
I get it from SMU's point of view. I really don't get it from the ACC's point of view because, as everyone will point out, it doesn't really fix the long term. But my only thought is maybe it does because they realize there's not a long term with those schools anyway. And let's go ahead and add our BYU and our Cincinnati and our Houston beforehand. And then when those schools leave, we've already basically set the table for ourselves. That's where I kind of landed. It's a premature action that's inevitable to happen anyways. And while these brands are out there, grab them and get a little something out of it and hope that can kind of cool the waters somewhat. But long term, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
What's the difference in what the ACC is at least thinking about doing in what the Big 12 did with the 4 schools from the Pac-12.
Other than the logistics of the thing, not really. I mean, like there's no, at least with the Big 12, there's a center part of it where, you're not every game is going to be, a 4-hour plane ride. As where for Stanford and Cal, every road game you have is minimum 2.5 to 3 hours to fly. Like the closest road game you have other than each other is to Dallas, which San Fran to Dallas is not a short flight. It's not overseas, but it's other than logistics, no, it's not different. What I don't understand is the TV networks are saying, well, there's not money for this, there's not money for this, there's not money. But of the Pac-12 schools, if the ACC does take Cal and Stanford and even takes them at a partial share, say they get $25 million. I don't know what the partial share is, but eventually they're going to get the full share. Eventually they're going to get what they turned down to keep the Pac-12 together at $30 million a year or so. And the only people who are left out in that are Oregon State and Washington State. So 10 of the 12.
If the money was there, in other words, why wouldn't they have just given the Pac-12? Well, of course, the Pac-12 turned that down.
Well, it makes them seem even dumber now.
Yeah.
In that the money was clearly there, not only for the Pac-12, but the Big 12, and that the networks were probably willing to do this at a certain amount. And the Pac-12 just handled this so badly that the conference is gone and the logistics are maddening. And now you're off all these other places. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just confused.
I think the big difference clearly between the Big 12 and the ACC is that the Big 12 didn't add these schools, and then they have Kansas and Kansas State and Oklahoma State and TCU threatening to still leave.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah, it's a huge difference, yeah.
So the Big 12 added schools that were additive and that are going to come in, and everybody is going to seemingly get along for the first time ever. I know there'll still be now new rivalries developed and new arguments and things like that, but compared to what it has been, with two have been ruling the roost, and then the ones that were doing it beforehand, I mean, all those parties are gone. So now I think you've got people who are seeing eye to eye. Florida State looking Wake Forest in the eye and saying, we're the same. No, absolutely they're not. I mean, they're not looking at Duke football and going like, yeah, that's us too. I mean, I think in the Big 12, it's more teams that are seeing eye to eye on a variety of things, including just sort of where they are in the world, where in the ACC, there's clearly some programs that feel they're the OU in Texas or they're the USC of that conference, and that's not just going to go away, and it's not going to be fixed by bringing in SMU and bringing in Stanford and Cal. Like, maybe that calms down some of the, I guess, concerns or worries to some extent, but I can't see where it's dramatic enough to change the opinion that they deserve and need to be in a bigger conference. So the big difference is the Big 12 is basically a group that's going to remain intact. Now, I know there's always the off chance of like the Big 10 gets, crazy and wants to become this or that, and they invite Kansas one day, right? Okay, like that's been a rumor that's been out there for a long time. Let's say they finally bite the bullet and they invite Kansas. That's one way that the Big 12 could suffer. But is there any looming threat that we know of right now for the Big 10 to come and poach Kansas? No, absolutely not. Is there one for, the ACC and that Florida State and Clemson, if they got an opportunity, would go somewhere? Absolutely. That's the big difference. One is more stable, and one is very much it's a question of how stable they are right now, but especially in the long term.
All right, so there's that, the 2-year anniversary of something that really never materialized. And even when there